stage 4 debate, the final stage of the Public Health Wales Bill before the Assembly today. The bill has undergone a lengthy journey to get to this point, from a green paper led by my predecessor, Leslie Griffiths, to a white paper, and through a detailed scrutiny process here in the Assembly. Today marks the end of that journey. And I'd like to start by thanking the chairs and members of the Health and Social Services Committee, the Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Committee and the Finance Committee for their thorough scrutiny work on the bill. Their work has been crucial in forming the bill that is before us today. Likewise, I would like to thank the broad range of stakeholders for their assistance throughout this process across each of the broad range of issues dealt with within this bill.
The result, Llywydd, of all that work and all that effort has been a high level of consensus for most of the practical measures which the bill contains, measures which I believe have been strengthened by that process of scrutiny. A bill which, as a result of all of that, now offers protections for children from the evils of tobacco, protections for those who undergo special procedures against the harms of infection, and for children and young people against the potential harms of intimate body piercing, protections for older people in particular from the public health damage which comes when there are insufficient toilets for use by the public, protections for the whole community, and especially for the most disadvantaged, which come from maximising the contribution of our community pharmacies and from ensuring health is taken into account in decision-making through health impact assessments. Against all that background of agreement, Llywydd, there's been only one aspect of the bill which has been controversial throughout. The background to it has been the great progress we have made over many decades in denormalising smoking, particularly for children and young people growing up in the smoke-free environments that we have succeeded in creating. The proposals in relation to the use of nicotine-inhaling devices in public places were always designed to maintain and sustain that position. That is why, having considered carefully the report of the Health and Social Care Committee, amendments were brought forward at stages 2 and 3 to create a more precise, explicit and focused regime. This regime is founded on the principle of protecting children in Wales by limiting the restrictions on NIDs to places where children are most likely to be present and therefore where the risks of renormalising smoking are greatest. The balance which we have always sought is one which allows the potential benefits of these devices for smoking cessation to be preserved while acting to prevent the potential harm they could cause. If this bill is passed today, anyone wishing to give up smoking will be able to substitute a conventional cigarette with an e-cigarette anywhere and everywhere a conventional cigarette can be used. I'm grateful to those members who have been willing to listen to the arguments on this issue and for their constructive engagement with them. As a result, Llywydd, I'm pleased to present today a bill which has been improved and strengthened in many material respects, but which also retains its core original ambitions. Across its broad range of provisions, it makes important contributions to public health in Wales, which I ask this Assembly to support. It puts in place important protections for the public. It delivers real improvements in facilities and services available for people in Wales. It protects the health and well-being of children, and it helps prevent avoidable harm. I commend the bill to the Assembly.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And given that this is one of the last pieces of debate in the Assembly today, I want to put on record before the end of the day my thanks to the Health Minister and his predecessors for the way in which they've engaged with me and my party over the duration of the Fifth Assembly. I hope that we've provided appropriate challenge at times and managed to secure consensus on other occasions too in trying to move the health agenda forward here in Wales. And I'm very proud of what has been achieved on a cross-party basis, for example, particularly on mental health in the Assembly over the years. But of course the subject matter today is the Public Health Bill which is before us. And as the Minister has quite rightly said, there's an awful lot in this bill on which there is consensus across the benches in the Senedd in terms of many of the provisions which are in the bill around pharmaceutical services, public conveniences, the special procedures and the harms which can be caused by those, smoking restrictions, the need for tobacco retailer registers, etc., etc. But there is this one element of the bill on which the Minister and I will never be able to agree at present, and that is the restrictions which the Minister is seeking to impose upon the use of e-cigarettes in some public places. And for that reason, I regret, Minister, that we will, as a Welsh Conservative group today, be voting against the bill before us. Not because we do not feel that there are merits in the other parts of the bill which we want to realise, but simply because, regrettably, these other elements of the bill have not been separated from the bill as a whole. We feel that it would have been much better to bring forward two bills, one which dealt with the e-cigarettes in isolation and another which dealt with the other aspects of public health which this particular piece of legislation seeks to address. Of course, there were other amendments which we tabled during the course of the Stage 2 and Stage 3 proceedings on this piece of legislation, which we would have liked to have been able, the government to have been able to support. We weren't able to persuade you to agree with those amendments, but we would be able to support all of these other parts of the bill if they were brought forward in a separate piece of legislation. And the fact is that they're not, and that's why we're going to be voting against. As I said at the outset, I do not feel that a war on e-cigarettes is the right approach. It's very clear that many people are deriving significant health benefits as a result of making the switch to e-cigarettes, and anything which gets a mixed message out to those individuals who are considering making the switch, I think is something which could be detrimental to public health as a whole here in Wales. Of course, we don't want to encourage young people to take up the use of e-cigarettes. Of course, we don't want young people to take up smoking either. But I think that the evidence at the moment just isn't there to support these sorts of measures going forward. And for that reason, I'm afraid, we'll be voting against. But I do want to thank the Minister for the way that he has listened and the way that we have been able to engage on the other parts of the bill before us.
Ellen Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and like others, I am very grateful to everyone who took the time to give evidence to the committee on these issues during Stage 1, and the evidence of those witnesses has been very influential in terms of how we as members of the committee have come to our conclusions about different aspects of the bill before us. And important steps are taken in the legislation before us today. It extends the areas that will be under prohibition for tobacco smoking, the process of licensing and businesses for tattooing, and special procedures will be increased. And there were amendments in Stage 3 last year that there will be assessment for new procedures too. But a matter that has divided opinion in committee before now and today too in the Assembly is the prohibition on the use of nicotine inhaling devices in specific public places. I said from the beginning of this process of scrutinising this legislation that we should be separating this part of legislation out from the remainder of the steps contained within the legislation, that it would have been a very good thing this afternoon if that separation had taken place, just as outlined by Darren Miller. The legislation before us today does a restricted list of public places where these NIDs will be prohibited, and in passing the legislation this afternoon, the use of NIDs will be legal and possible in many locations where cigarette smoking would not be allowed. But this legislation is a very small step towards improving significantly public health, and there are a great many further steps that are for the next Assembly to be taken. As it happens today, George Osborne has announced his intention to introduce the pop tax in his budget, and it will be a matter for the next government and for the next Assembly to make the case with the Treasury, I would say, whether the pop tax should be a policy for Wales and for this Assembly, and to create a revenue line for the Welsh Treasury rather than George Osborne's Treasury. But that's an argument for the 5th Assembly. For today, the legislation before us is the Public Health Wales Bill, and to be approved or not later on this afternoon.
Kirsty Williams.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Could I begin by thanking the Minister for his opening comments this afternoon, and to echo them in regards to the thanks that is due to all those that have worked so hard during the passage of this legislation to date. All those civil servants within the Minister's own department, those outside of the Assembly. But in particular, I'd like to thank David Rees, the Chair of the Health and Social Services Committee, and Super Sub Lynn Neagle, who chaired a crucial meeting that deliberated the bill. It was not an easy thing to do, to be able to bring the committee together to be able to agree a report, and David and Lynn showed great skill in being able to facilitate that over very many hours of deliberation. I think, Presiding Officer, it is right that the government has taken time in its legislative programme to focus on the issue of public health. There is some to do, but I also recognise that legislation only has some role to play in that. There is much we need to do outside the context of legislation that we must do if we are to have a new approach to public health delivery here in Wales. Now, personally, my party would like to see a much greater role for local government in the field of public health. The way in which they design and deliver services on the ground can make a massive difference to the health of our nation. And I think that is a challenge for the incoming government to look to see what we can do to have a new renaissance in public health. It's difficult for governments to do that. The pressure is always on delivery in the here and now, and it's difficult to invest a significant resource in programmes that hopefully will deliver change much further down the line, long after that particular minister or administration has left the field of play, so to speak. And I think we need particularly to focus our efforts on many of our poorer communities. At the beginning of this term of the National Assembly, the government did set itself the target of narrowing the gap, the health gap between those of our poorest citizens and those of our more well-off citizens. And the government has made progress with regards to that in terms of education. But when it comes to the health inequalities that we see within our nation, they are deeply embedded, and I'm sure the Minister would be the first to admit we haven't made the progress that he would have liked to over the last 5 years, and therefore we need to look again at what we can do within those specific communities and within specific areas of Wales to empower those people to take more control over their health and to address the behaviours that lead them to make and choose unhealthy lifestyles. I am particularly a fan of the scheme introduced in Philadelphia, working in some of the most deprived communities in America, with a focus on schools, young people, access to good, healthy, fresh food at affordable prices within communities that allows people to get to those shops, and what we can do to do something similar here in Wales. There is much in the bill that I agree with, but of course the issue of nicotine inhaling devices, vaping, for me, unfortunately, is a showstopper in this regard. As I said in the debate last week, a public health bill should contain measures that increase the health and well-being of a nation and its population. And I truly am of the opinion that the approach taken on vaping will not enhance public health in Wales, actually will endanger potential public health gains. Of course.
The
Minister said that people will be able to vape everywhere that they can smoke conventional cigarettes. Would you agree that the Minister has completely missed the point, in that we have to make it practically advantageous for people to choose an option that is, if not without its problems entirely, that is healthier as an alternative to smoking tobacco?
I would agree, Rhyn, that not only have we not created a positive advantage for people to seek a harm reduction method, and that is what e-cigarettes are, they are a harm reduction method. We use harm reduction methods in many other aspects of health, but we haven't done it in this case. The issue is, not only that, is that we will positively put people off taking that choice, because we will, if we pass this legislation today, equate smoking and vaping as exactly the same thing, and the evidence shows that that puts people off. Now, earlier today, one minister described Plaid Cymru as a cheap date. Now, I don't know whether the deal to pass this legislation is cheap or not, but I do believe it will not enhance public health measures, and my group will not support the legislation as drafted.
Jocelyn Davies.
Well, I can assure you, Kirsty, I'm not a cheap night out. I won't be voting in favour, if any of you was considering asking me, that is. I'm not in favour of voting for this bill today. Throughout the scrutiny process, I've made my reasons quite clear, and although I've listened to the Minister's arguments initially for treating vaping devices identically to cigarettes, and then following his slight climb down for significantly restricting their use, I have remained unconvinced by his reasoning. Now, last week, he wouldn't take an intervention from me when he cited evidence that nicotine inhaling devices have been found to be the least effective method in helping people stop smoking. Now, I am aware of the meta-analysis study he is referencing there, and I'm also aware that the usefulness of that study has been publicly and comprehensively debunked. Now, I don't know if the Minister or any of you here ever listened to the More or Less Radio 4 programme presented by Tim Hartford, but they pointed out that when drawing on the studies for that paper, no effort was made to distinguish between those who were using nicotine inhaling devices to give up and those who were using them to cut down on their smoking, but were not attempting to stop completely. So included in the figures used by the government are people not trying to give up tobacco. They might be using that device while they're travelling, while they're in the car, while they're with other people at home, but they are not trying to give up tobacco. And without making that distinction, the study cannot be relied upon to make sweeping statements about the effectiveness of devices. Now, it was, of course, the Minister's own choice to cite that particular study, but I have to say it added nothing to the knowledge on this subject, other than the government evidence is poor. And that's because the body of evidence is still growing. And until much more work is done, we can't come to any concrete conclusions. Now, last week, the Minister also dismissed the position of those who oppose his ban as believing that e-cigarettes are entirely benign, and I'm quoting from him there. Now, I have said many times, that we've just heard from Kirsty, that I wouldn't encourage anybody to think that drawing chemicals into your lungs could possibly be considered wholly healthy choice, and I've said that every single time I've spoken on this subject. But it's been disappointing to watch the government so dismissive of the amounts of evidence produced by numerous organisations and the powerful personal testimonies of those who have successfully given up smoking using nicotine inhaling devices. Now, there probably is cause for the government to legislate on this matter, the advertising, for example, or the regulation, but the time to do so is after thoughtful consultation process and not rush through in a bill about other things, incidentally, that I'd also like to support. But putting those things at risk, again, is the Minister's own choice. It was his choice to put it in this bill. I think the Minister has made few friends with this bill. I have received many, well, passionate emails from individuals who were opposed to it, compared to the 3 identical template emails from those who were in favour. And I'm saddened to see the Welsh Government pass a bill that's so out of touch, I think, with public opinion. Now, I hope those members who are considering supporting you are persuaded now that this is a matter better left until there's evidence available to make a judgment.
I call the Minister for Health and Social Services to reply to the debate. Mark Drakeford.
Well, this bill is certainly not the end of the story as far as public health in Wales is concerned, neither legislatively, nor fiscally, nor practically. There are many things that a future government will want to do to continue to address the very real public health challenges which our population, just as other populations too, face. But it is a bill which is full of very practical and significant measures that will make a real difference here in Wales. It is a bill which has been improved and strengthened by the efforts of members across this chamber. It has health impact assessments on the face of the bill for the first time. It extends restrictions on smoking where children are present into non-enclosed public places. It has a strengthened national perspective as far as toilets for use by the public are concerned. It protects the interests of dispensing doctors where pharmaceutical needs assessments are concerned. It has a new, precise, focused regime in relation to nicotine inhaling devices. All of those things are changes to the bill as introduced by the government. All of them are there because of arguments that members across this chamber have deployed, drawing on the expert advice that has been available throughout the passage of this bill. It's now for members to choose. It's not my choice, as Jocelyn Davis has suggested. The bill in front of the Assembly this afternoon is the bill that has won support in vote after vote across the floor. It is the bill which is here because a majority of members in this place have supported it. Some people believe that all the gains and all the protections that are there for all those different categories of our population are outweighed by one single aspect of it. I do not agree. I think members here should think about that choice, as I'm sure they will, and when they think it through, they will conclude that everything that this bill delivers for children, for older people, for our disadvantaged communities, for people across Wales, are not to be set aside because of one aspect that some people here take a different view on, and which other people equally seriously and with equal weight of evidence on their side take a different view. Thank you, Claire.
The proposal is to agree the motion. Does any member object? Objections, therefore, I defer all voting on this item until voting time. And the only vote we have is on the stage 4 of the Public Health Wales Bill, and I call for a vote on the motion, table in the name of Mark Drakeford. Table in the name of Mark Drakeford. Open the vote. Close the vote. 26 for, no abstentions, 26 against. Therefore, I have to cast my vote against. Right. Sorry, I can't clear my... Can you clear it for me? Sorry. No. I'll use the paper version, sorry. Oh, fine. Well, that concludes the Assembly's formal business.